The other day I received an email from a gentleman who had gotten so involved in drawing his project in SketchUp that he'd forgotten to make components of a number of the parts. Due to the sticky nature of geometry in SketchUp, all these parts were joined together. He asked if it is possible to separate the parts so he wouldn't have to start over. There are a couple of ways to do this. I'll show the method I showed him. I think it is the easiest, and it helps you keep everything straight. For this video, I'm going to demonstrate this process using the door on this wall cabinet / shelf. Although I did originally draw the rails, stiles, and panel as separate components, I converted it to a single component for this example. I'll convert it back into the 5 separate parts. Then in the next video, I'll add the joinery to the parts. Before I start editing the door, I'm going to take a moment to make a change in the model info. Under components, I'm going to tick the box for hiding the rest of the model. I don't normally work this way, but for this particular application I'll turn that on. That's a scene-specific setting, by the way, so if you wanted that to remain active after you change scenes, you would need to update the scene when you've made that change. Alright, so I'm going to open the door for editing. The door currently consists of the door component and the knob, which I did leave separate. So I'm going to open the door for editing, and now it's time to move on with creating these separate components. I did draw in lines to identify the ends of the rails, show that separation. If you were going to leave the door as a single component instead of its 5 separate parts, adding those lines is helpful if you apply materials, because you can get the materials to orient correctly then in just the areas where you want them. And for no particular reason, I'm going to just start with this left-hand style, and I've selected it by double-clicking on it, and then I'm going to copy that out in front using the Move tool, and we'll go about 6 inches. That distance isn't critical, but it's something that I can remember long enough to get this all done. Now I'll use push-pull and give this some thickness. One thing to note, the intersections between the edges of the rails and the edge of the stile break that vertical line, and so you get little horizontal lines there when you extrude that to make it 3D. So we'll just get rid of those because we won't want those later. And then triple click and hit G to make a component, and then we'll create the stile component. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to make the one on the right by holding the Shift key, or in this case I could use the right cursor key to lock the move direction. I was able to then use the existing door as a reference to get this stile in the right place without having to know the measurements. I'm going to, just to show you this, I'm going to add a little mark here temporarily. And actually, let's change that. Let me make that go this way. Alright, so you can see both of these stiles, being instances of the same component, have the same alignment. So I'm going to flip this along the red direction to make a mirrored image. Normally I wouldn't put the mark on there for myself because I can keep track of that, but I just wanted to show you that from the beginning. Now I will repeat the process for the bottom rail. So I just copy that out. This time I was able to use the style components as a reference, and push-pull, double-click just takes care of that quickly. Make that a component, call it a rail, and we'll use the move tool and we'll copy that up to the top, and I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut to flip that, so it won't look any different at this point, but it will be different. Now all we have left is the panel, and what I'm going to do here is, thinking ahead a little bit, I'm going to create the back of the panel now. Because of the carving on the front, using push-pull to create the 3D panel would be a little problematic, and it's easier, I think, to do this. So I'm going to use offset, and I'm going to come in here. Now I didn't look at the dimension and don't remember how far in I had to go. So by switching to X-ray mode, I can just use the panel on the front to get that distance. Had I been smart, I would have looked at or measured that distance in the first place, but I can just use that as a reference. And then I'm going to use push-pull, and I'm going to push that in 3/16 of an inch. That'll give me a 1/4 inch thick panel when I get done. I did check that. So now I'm going to delete the rest of the door because we don't need all that stuff. And I'm going to leave basically I'm going to leave the panel where I made it, or where it was to start with. And so there's just a little bit of cleanup, not a big deal. But we do want to get rid of all of those lines. And then I'm going to disconnect the corners, and I see I've got a line there I need to get rid of, and maybe one over here. Nope. Okay. So now I've selected the panel, and I will create a component out of that. Now these parts get moved back 6 inches. There's why I wanted to remember the distance. And I've got what looks like the door again, but again it's 5 separate components. So in the next video I will add the joinery and the mortises for the hinges, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how to convert something from one single mass into component parts.